If you only give me a minute, let it be this. A room of 200 people glittered like champagne. My orchestra hit the swell, right on cue, and I wrapped my arms around my dad, the man who once slept in the front seat of a rusted pickup so I wouldn't be cold, pulled him into the light of our 12-foot tree, and said the stupidest sentence of my life. Dad, hope you're enjoying your $8,000 a month allowance. I meant it as a soft joke, a reminder that I was trying to be a good son now that my face shows up on magazine covers. He smiled the way he does when he doesn't want to make me feel bad, the way he did when we'd split a cup of instant noodles, and he said, gently, allowance. Then, louder because the band was getting into it, Alex, I'm working 60 hours a week at 3 jobs. The hook snagged every sound in the room. My wife, Sabrina, mid-sip of sparkling rose, lowered her glass without blinking. Conversations thinned to whispers. And I, Alexander Vale, the boy wonder billionaire with a company valuation that climbs like a sunrise, felt my stomach fall straight through the imported marble floor. I'm the boy in that thumbnail, the son with too much money and too little attention in the right places. This is my confession. Let me rewind several hours because it matters how perfectly everything was arranged. The party was Sabrina's idea. Sabrina, who can coax an army of florists, lighting designers, and chefs into communion with a spreadsheet. She'd chosen a theme she called Heritage Christmas, which meant everything was warm and photogenic. Real pine, cinnamon sticks tied to napkins, and a live painter in the corner doing quick oil portraits of our guests as proof that we're the sort of people who have live painters in our homes. I just closed a funding round. The press was good. Our CTO wasn't actively threatening to quit. Serenity, in other words, a costly stillness that only successful people can afford. My dad had driven down from Cedar Flats in the same pickup he bought before I learned to drive. He wore an old sweater of mine I didn't even remember, green, with snowflakes and a few unraveled threads at the cuffs. If pride has a smell, for my dad it's motor oil and peppermint. I caught both when he stepped through the door, and for a moment the 20-year climb from nothing to everything collapsed until I was just a son who could finally give his father a better life. The flight I bought him. The stipend I set up. The safety net. I had asked my CFO, Marcus, to establish a direct deposit into Dad's checking account months ago, not long after Sabrina and I married. We called it a family allowance because calling it restoration for 2 decades of backbreaking sacrifice made everyone cry. $8,000 a month, automatic, no questions. Dad resisted at first. He's a proud man with a moral spine you could hang a house on, but the world charges interest on humility. He finally agreed, and I exhaled the guilt I'd been carrying since I was old enough to understand how hard he worked to keep me upright. So at the party, when I hugged him and made that line about the allowance, I thought I was being playful and affectionate. I thought I knew where my money went. Allowance, he repeated, his eyebrows folded, not like he was accusing me of something, but like he was trying to put a puzzle together without corner pieces. Alex, I'm working 60 hours a week at 3 jobs. I felt the words before I heard them. 60 hours. 3 jobs. Dad sounded tired in a way he doesn't allow himself to sound, and all the glass in the world couldn't soften it. Sabrina was beside me instantly, her smile brilliant, her eyes calculating. Daniel, you're joking, she said in that cheerful tone that doubles as a warning. Alex set up everything months ago. You told me you were fine. Remember? You said you didn't want to be spoiled. Dad glanced at her, then at me, and his mouth twitched with the effort of keeping the peace. Honey, I'm always fine, he said to her, like fine was a favor he could do us. Then to me, I didn't want to bring it up here. A ripple runs through a party when the host is confused. It's like the DJ lost the beat, and everyone tries to find a new one. I felt every gaze flicker and turn away. My investors, my founders, my friends who learned to love the version of me with appetizers. Every one of them pretended not to notice the earthquake opening at our feet. I took Dad's elbow and led him toward the library, away from the camera with the flashing light and the cluster of people taking oranges from the pyramid because none of them eats dessert. My heart was hammering for no sensible reason, as if I were pitching again and the room might vote me out of my own story. Tell me, I said. Please. He exhaled through a tight smile. Alex, I didn't want to be trouble. When you started the allowance talk, I told you, I'm okay. I'm working 3 jobs? He nodded once, a man reporting the weather. It helps. Rent's gone up. Benefits aren't what they used to be. I like staying busy. It's good for me. The library smelled like wood polish and relief I wasn't feeling. I took out my phone. You never got the transfers? What transfers? He wasn't acting. My father can't lie. He's terrible at it. He gets the same crease between his eyebrows he used to get when I told him I'd finished my homework, and he found a video game paused behind a textbook. I thumbed messages to Marcus. Can you check my dad's stipend? Like right now. Sabrina followed us in, closing the door gently, angling her body so the line of sight from the party was clean. She's exquisite at managing optics. We don't need to make a scene, she said softly, as if I'd hauled out a megaphone and a subpoena. Daniel, you told me on the phone you were comfortable. You said to route support through the foundation because you didn't want deposits in your account. I looked at Dad. He looked at her. What phone call? He asked. The one in September, she said, hand to her chest in gentle disbelief. When you and I talked about pride and dignity. He shook his head. I didn't talk to you in September, sweetheart. I barely know where my phone is half the time. My phone buzzed. Marcus, all good. Payments have been going out since May like clockwork to devail per structure signed by UNS. I stared at the words until they blurred. Sabrina stepped closer, not touching me, but doing that thing where her presence is the touch. See, she whispered, not for Dad. He must have forgotten. We did exactly what you asked. Marcus, I typed, to what account? A dot bounced. Then a string of numbers arrived that I didn't recognize. Dad pulled his wallet from his back pocket, thin as a leaf, and handed me a bank card. Mine ends in 9843. The account Marcus listed ended in 7714. I have given speeches to rooms of 3,000 people about building systems that never break. And I will tell you, sometimes your personal life is the brittle thing you ignore until it snaps cleanly in your hands. A cold creep moved up my spine. I met Sabrina's eyes and did not recognize them. Dad, I said, every word careful. If you didn't get it, where did it go? He shrugged, apologetic for a problem he didn't cause. Son, I really don't know. Can we talk after your party? I'm not trying to ruin your... My dad had driven down from Cedar Flats in the same pickup he bought before I learned to drive. He wore an old sweater of mine I didn't even remember, green, with snowflakes and a few unraveled threads at the cuffs. If pride has a smell, from my dad it's motor oil and peppermint. I caught both when he stepped through the door, and for a moment the 20-year climb from nothing to everything collapsed until I was just a son who could finally give his father a better life. The flight I bought him. The stipend I set up. The safety net. I had asked my CFO, Marcus, to establish a direct deposit into Dad's checking account months ago, not long after Sabrina and I married. We called it a family allowance because calling it restoration for 2 decades of backbreaking sacrifice made everyone cry. $8,000 a month, automatic, no questions. Dad resisted at first. He's a proud man with a moral spine you could hang a house on, but the world charges interest on humility. He finally agreed, and I exhaled the guilt I'd been carrying since I was old enough to understand how hard he worked to keep me upright. So at the party, when I hugged him and made that line about the allowance, I thought I was being playful and affectionate. I thought I knew where my money went. Allowance, he repeated, his eyebrows folded. Not like he was accusing me of something, but like he was trying to put a puzzle together without corner pieces. Alex, I'm working 60 hours a week at 3 jobs. I felt the words before I heard them. 60 hours. 3 jobs. Dad sounded tired in a way he doesn't allow himself to sound, and all the glass in the world couldn't soften it. Sabrina was beside me instantly, her smile brilliant, her eyes calculating. Daniel, you're joking, she said in that cheerful tone that doubles as a warning. Alex set up everything months ago. You told me you were fine. Remember? You said you. I embarrassed him. The surprise came out sharp. By discovering he's still working himself into the ground while we've been supporting him, she tilted her head, disappointment like a lens she slipped over her eyes. We had a plan. We funnel support through the Vail Foundation, so it doesn't feel like handouts. You signed the structure. I signed 1,000 documents that week, I said. I thought I was signing an intent, not a reroute. You told me you didn't want direct deposits to be a headline if someone got nosy. Billionaire puts father on payroll. Remember? I was protecting you. The thing about being rich is that people assume any line you draw around your life is a boundary of taste rather than fear. Maybe I'd said something like that. Maybe I nodded during a meeting while Sabrina scrolled through a deck of options that all sounded reasonable because success had made me lazy in the exact places I shouldn't be. My phone vibrated. Marcus again. Boss, I'm up. Want me to log into Portal and send statement? I could do a quick trace. Also, Sabrina asked us to convert stipend to support services in June. Want to keep? My breath clouded in the cold. Marcus, I typed, send everything. Full history, emails, approvals, names on the accounts. Sabrina watched me type. Stop, she said. Don't make this ugly. Did you direct my dad's stipend into the foundation? She folded her arms. I directed it into the family support structure we set up? Yes. As we discussed, which means the money covered services for your father, groceries, medical, rent assistance, without putting him in the awkward position of saying thank you every month. I tracked every penny. Show me, I said. She didn't move. The door opened behind me, and Dad's voice floated out, tentative. Is this a bad time? Sabrina's smile reassembled without creaking. Never, she said. We were just getting some air. Come inside, Dad, I said. We'll talk in the morning. Because I needed receipts, words that weren't stuck to feelings. I needed math. At 3:17 a.m., alone in the office down the hall, I opened the email Marcus had sent. The subject line was D. Veil Support Documentation. Inside were PDFs of account changes, a spreadsheet with automatic transfers highlighted in green, and a folder of invoices paid by the Vail Family Foundation on behalf of beneficiary, Daniel Vail. The first 6 months showed deposits to an account ending in 7714. Owner, Vail Family Support, LLC. Autorized signatories, a Vale, S. Vale. That was the temporary holding account we'd created to stage family gifts and philanthropic expenses. I remembered the rationale. Social optics, tax efficiency, oversight. The idea had not been entirely bad. But the transfers out of that account told the real story. Instead of recurring payments to a checking account with my dad's name, I saw charges coded support services. They were categorized into buckets: household, health, transportation, personal development. It would have been damning if it hadn't been, at first glance, so tidy. I clicked Open Household. There were payments to Cedar Flats Community Market for groceries, 3 times a month, $180, $220, $198. There were utility bills to North County Electric, rent to Cedar Flats residences, and then, starting 2 months later, no rent at all. I called up Cedar Flats residences on my laptop. They didn't exist. I looked at the utility company. It existed, but the account number wasn't my father's. My jaw tightened. Health showed payments to a dental clinic. Legitimate, I thought, until I saw the address. Los Angeles, not Cedar Flats. Transportation was rideshare credits redeemable in Los Angeles. Personal development included a $5,000 sponsorship fee. Voices of Tomorrow, Sabrina's media incubator. My hand shook. The invoices were feeding a narrative, the foundation, supporting Daniel Vail's needs while preserving his dignity. But the fiction leaked through the numbers. My father wasn't redeeming rideshare credits in a city he visited twice a year. He wasn't taking vocals training or mindfulness coaching or brand storytelling seminars. The company paying the rent that didn't exist was CF Residences, LLC, owned by 1S Group Holdings. Sabrina's umbrella. I scrolled through the email chain between Marcus and Sabrina. He had asked questions early on. She had answered with the confidence of a woman leaning on a folder labeled Best Practices. She referenced my approval, arguing that I preferred a clean paper trail. And there it was, my signature on an authorization granting her discretion to route support as needed to ensure beneficiary well-being. The date, the afternoon of our wedding rehearsal, when I was initialing place cards and signing whatever the parade of well-meaning coordinators put in front of me. I shut the laptop softly, like any louder would break something else. At 9 a.m., after neither of us slept, I drove Dad to breakfast at the diner by the lake. He ordered a simple breakfast like always, counting the change in his wallet before he ordered because habits are chemical. They don't dissolve just because you can afford better ones. "I'm sorry," I said, when the waitress had refilled his coffee. "For last night." He smiled over his menu. "You said you didn't want me to take care of you, son. That wasn't your job, remember? I remember you taking on an extra shift so I could have cleats for baseball. I remember you pretending the broken thermostat was fine in the winter because you'd always liked sleeping in the cold. My job now is to make sure you never have to lie about being okay." He absorbed that with the patience of man let down gently by life too many times to take every promise too personally. "I'm doing fine," he repeated, but it sounded more like a reassurance than a defense. "Work keeps me sharp. There's the morning shift at the hardware store. Afternoons, delivering for the pharmacy. Nights at the distribution warehouse when they need extra hands. I like the warehouse best. There's a rhythm to it, boxes and belts and people just trying to hit their numbers. Why didn't you tell me?" My voice cracked, a teenager's betrayal sneaking back. "Why didn't you ask?" He chuckled, not unkindly. "Ask? You're busy building satellites," he said. "It's not satellites. Our company builds microtransaction infrastructure, but in Dad's head, any technology he can't fix with a wrench qualifies as outer space. And you got married. You're figuring out how to be a husband. That's plenty. Did Sabrina ever call you about routing support through the foundation?" He frowned into his coffee. "No, she's nice to me, but we haven't had those kind of conversations." I wouldn't know what to say. I showed him the invoices on my phone. The thread through my chest tightened as his eyes moved across the screen. "I didn't get any of this," he murmured. "Well, groceries maybe once or twice. A card with some credits that didn't seem to work. The foundation sent a birthday card. I put it on the mantle. A truck rumbled by outside. Someone dropped cutlery in the kitchen and apologized loudly. Life continued in a sloppy tempo that felt, for once, honest. "Come stay with me a few days," I said. "We're going to figure this out." He shook his head. "I can't miss work. I'll pay you more than they do." He winced. Pride again, the loneliest armor. Let me at least give notice. There was no use arguing with him in public. I settled the check while he tried to insist on paying. On the way back to the house, I dialed Marcus and put him on speaker. "Morning, boss," Marcus said, chipper from too much coffee and not enough sleep. I did more digging. We've been directing funds into Vail Family Support, then out to a cluster of vendors. Some legitimate, some questionable. Looks like Sabrina's office had primary execution on support disbursements. Questionable how? I asked, even though I had read enough to know. He coughed. A lot of the support looks like expenses for group holdings, social media campaigns, event spaces, a studio lease. There's a subentity called Voices of Tomorrow, and, okay, this is awkward, payments to a PR firm that also represents Sabrina individually. Dad was looking out the window at the way the sun caught on the lake, maybe considering where in his life he could fold away without making a fuss. I felt a rage that had more to do with how I'd abdicated than with what someone else had done. Back at the house, Sabrina met us in the kitchen. She had made Dad oatmeal with berries. She's not a villain in a cartoon. She's a person who believes in order, and she believed what she was doing was ordering my life in a way I'd implicitly approved. "We need to sit down tonight," I said to her. "You, me, Dad, Marcus on Zoom." She didn't flinch. "Of course," she said. "We'll clear it up." Then, eyes fixed on me, "Speak kindly." That night, as the snow started, we gathered in the library again. The same room where the music had dipped held its breath. Marcus's face appeared in a rectangle on the screen, pixels making his hair look thinner than it is. Sabrina set a folder on the table carefully, as if we were performing a ritual. "What's going on, children?" Dad asked, the same way he used to ask when I'd thrown a football in the house and shattered a lamp. "I'm going to show you something," I said, and slid the laptop toward him. Within the first 5 minutes, I watched my father's hands go still on the table. By minute 10, Sabrina's breathing had gone shallow. By minute 12, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus that said simply, "Brace." "Why would you do this?" Dad asked finally, not angry, just astonished, like he'd opened a familiar cupboard and all the cups were upside down. Sabrina lifted her chin. To protect him, she said. To protect you both. From what? I said, but I already knew. From headlines, she said. From the narrative. From everyone who uses you, Alex. From the way she nodded at my father, won't ask for anything. This is me trying to make sure nobody has to beg or explain. And yes, I routed some of the funds to Voices of Tomorrow because empowering storytellers is part of our family mission, and I held up a hand. Sabrina. Stop. She did. The room felt like it was standing on tiptoe, waiting. I looked at my dad, then at the screen where Marcus had his mouth clamped shut, and said, Tomorrow, we audit everything. Sabrina's fingers curled on the folder. For the first time since the party, she looked unsure. The snow tapped the window, impatient as a metronome. Part 3, the freeze. Our auditor arrived at noon, which is to say my friend Priya, who has the gift of looking gentle and being brutal. She's rebuilt companies after hostile takeovers. She once traced $1 million through a chain of shell corporations while eating sandwich. When she sees rot, she doesn't flinch. She just circles the spot, draws a box around it, and writes, here. Start cutting. She set up in the dining room with a pair of laptops, a portable scanner, and a pot of tea. Sabrina placed the foundation's ledgers on one end of the table, like offerings to a priest. I brought mine, the emails, the invoices, bank statements Marcus had compiled. Dad hovered for a while, uncomfortable in spaces where everyone has a task except him, then retreated to the den where I'd set up an old recliner near a window. He watched the snow and pretended not to hear.
Walk me through this, Priya said, and Sabrina, to her credit, did. For 2 hours, she was competent and persuasive, explaining the decision-making tree, how we identified needs, how we paid vendors directly to avoid dependency, how we tracked everything. She did not dodge. She did not self-pity. She wore down my anger until only questions remained. Then Priya asked her to open the subledgers for support services and pipeline funding. Sabrina did, and the root system of her choices spread across the screen like veins. Okay, Priya said quietly. Here's the issue. The individual listed as beneficiary, Daniel, did not receive the primary benefit of these disbursements. You laundered, not criminally, but effectively, you laundered family support into your strategic projects. I suspect you did it with good intentions and a dose of self-interest you rationalized as alignment. Unfortunately, intent doesn't restore money. It just softens prison sentences. Sabrina flushed. Are you accusing me of fraud? Priya shrugged. Not my job. I'm telling my client he's been negligent in oversight and that his spouse's judgment has been clouded by mission creep. I pushed back from the table. Dad, I called. Can you come in here? He did, blinked at the rows of numbers, the graphs Priya had conjured, and tried to look like this language was one he could pick up quickly if someone just handed him a dictionary. You don't have to, he started. I do, I said. Please, sit. Priya turned the laptop so it faced him. Mr. Vale, this is where the money should have gone, she said, pointing to a column of recurring payments. And this is where it did. She highlighted a web of vendors, some real, some decorative. Do you recognize any of these? He peered. Well, he said after a moment, I know the market. I buy apples there sometimes. But that other one, he pointed to CF Residences. Never heard of it. And I don't sing, he added, pointing at the vocal training. Something in Sabrina's posture gave a slight droop, like a sail losing wind. She looked at me. Say something, she said. What would you like me to say? I asked. That you always knew we were directing funds to the foundation, she said, going suddenly formal. That you signed off. I signed off on supporting my father in a way that preserved dignity, I said. I did not sign off on subsidizing your studio, or your friends' podcasts, or a fake landlord. She crossed her arms tight as a misfolded map. It is not fake. It's a pass-through entity to streamline. To streamline hiding, Priya finished calmly. Again, I'm not the law. I'm the one who labels the boxes. If you want to argue about which shelves they belong on, save it for counsel. Sabrina looked past me to my father, as if appealing to an older, simpler world. Daniel, she said, and for the first time since the party her voice wavered. "You told me you wanted to keep your pride. You told me you didn't want to be a story about a rich son rescuing his poor father." He frowned. "I told you that?" he asked gently. "Sweetheart, I don't think we've had more than 5 conversations alone. I'd remember a talk like that." The silence that followed was the kind that folds a room in half. Sabrina opened her mouth, closed it, and then, "This is the part burned into me." She went still. Not dramatic, not performative. She froze. I remember thinking, this is the moment. Not the expensive party. Not the spreadsheets. The freeze. The human brain recalibrating in real time, deciding between doubling down and stepping back. Her eyes brimmed, but she didn't blink. "I will fix it," she said finally, voice small. "I'll move the money back." "It's not just money," Dad said softly. "It's a whole story you wrote with my name." She looked broken open. "I thought." She gulped air like it had turned to glass. "I thought I was protecting the brand of this family. The brand of Alex. The headlines, the trolls, they—"
"The brand of this family," I said, "is that when my father says he's fine, we check whether he's fine with food in the fridge and a doctor he can afford. Not that we import our fear of public opinion into his grocery list." "I didn't want you to think he was using you," she said to me, tears finally sliding, "or that you were neglecting him. I want a clean story." Dad reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "That's who he is. You're not a bad person," he said. "You just build a maze to keep feelings from bumping into money." I swallowed hard. "Priya," I said, "what happens now?" "We claw back what we can," she said. "You reconstitute a fund directly for your father with transparent disbursements. You fire anyone who signed off on this without pushing back." In the corner of the screen, Marcus winced. "You also consider the legal implications. And you too," she gestured at Sabrina and me, "figure out whether you're building a life or an image." After Priya left, after Marcus signed off with a promise to overnight every document, after Dad retreated to the den like a man stepping out of a fight he never wanted, Sabrina and I stood in the kitchen facing each other like boxers waiting for the bell. "Are you going to leave me?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I know I'm going to take care of my father myself. I know I'm dissolving the foundation's control over family support. I know I'm appointing Priya to oversee it. And me?" Her voice thinned. "I don't know," I repeated. "I married you because you were a door I wanted to walk through. Today, I discovered where it led, and I'm not sure it's where I'm meant to live." She leaned on the counter, palms flat, tears dropping to the marble. "I was trying to be the wife a man like you needs," she said. "I thought that meant understanding optics better than you, anticipating narratives, absorbing the ugly parts so you didn't have to. I don't need a wife to absorb my father," I said. That night, I slept in the guest room next to my dad's suite. Around 2 a.m., I heard him cough and patted in. He was awake, reading a paperback he'd brought. "You okay?" I asked. He smiled. "I'm worried about the girl," he said. "She's scared." "I'm furious with her," I said. "Being scared makes people do foolish things," he said. "Being proud, too. What does being absent make people do?" He gave me a look that pierced cleaner than any reproach. "It makes other people decide for you." The next morning, I drove him back to Cedar Flats so he could quit all 3 jobs in person. He insisted on it. We stopped at each place. The hardware store, where a teenage manager tried not to cry. The pharmacy, where the pharmacist hugged Dad and offered him part-time hours anytime. The warehouse, where men with tired eyes clapped him on the back and told him he was the good kind of fast. On the drive home, an alert popped on my phone. A headline: "Billionaire's father works 3 jobs while son throws glamorous holiday gala." A source at the party. Someone had talked. The story was kind at first, then it grew fangs in the comments. The internet knows how to make everything a morality play and cast the heroes in whichever roles get the most clicks. I pulled over. "Dad, I'm about to become the villain of the day," I said. He squinted at the screen. "Tomorrow it'll be someone else," he said. "But I know who you are. That counts." Sabrina texted, "We can shape the narrative. Let me handle it." I stared at the words. Then I texted back, "No, I'll handle it by making the reality different." I learned that week how to hold a wrench again. Not a literal one, though Dad could have handed me a set, and it would have felt the same. I learned the weight of fixing things you should never have let break. First, I took my father to a bank in Cedar Flats and opened 3 accounts with him. Checking, savings, and an account dedicated to surprise joy because I'd learned how easy it is to remember rent and forget wonder. We set up a direct deposit from my personal account. No foundations, no pass-throughs, no optics. $8,000 a month? Yes, plus immediate deposits to cover the debts he'd taken on quietly. The medical bill he'd been paying in installments for a root canal, the overdue notice for a busted heater he'd replaced for his neighbor. Then we went to the health clinic and scheduled a full checkup. We upgraded his truck's tires because he had been telling himself they could last one more winter. We walked through his tiny apartment, and I made a list of things that needed replacing. The couch, the stove, the insulation that had more memory than function. "You don't have to," he said with every item, and I said, "I know," with every item, and in that exchange, we were both right. I called the companies where he worked and set up farewell gatherings. I stood in those break rooms with their plastic tablecloths and trays of cookies from the grocery store and thanked the people who had been my father's community while I learned how to be someone else. I listened to stories about him, how he covers shifts without being asked, how he memorizes the names of the grandkids in the pharmacy line, how he hums under his breath when the conveyor belt at the warehouse finds the right tempo. The man they described was the axis of a small, sturdy world. I wanted a piece of that gravity again. Back in the city, I hired Priya to formalize a family charter. We wrote it together, Dad and I, over coffee at the kitchen table. It fit on one page. Money never substitutes for presence. Presence never excuses negligence. Help is offered directly and accepted without shame. Transparency isn't cruelty, it's respect. Family is not a brand. We signed it. I framed it and hung it in the library where the tree had been. With Priya's guidance, I dismantled the complicated scaffolding Sabrina had built around my life. I shut down the support pipeline through the foundation. We audited Voices of Tomorrow. Some of its work was beautiful. Some of it was fluff. We clawed back funds that had been misrouted. I repaid what the foundation had covered fairly. I paid taxes where taxes had been avoided, because if I was going to preach transparency, it couldn't stop at the family line. I fired Marcus, not because he was malicious, he was a good soldier, but because he had followed instructions too easily when the instructions smelled like perfume instead of policy. He took it like a man who liked his job and knew he'd lost it for cause. We hugged. Then I hired him back 6 months later in a different capacity, on the condition that he argue with me when I deserved it. And Sabrina, what about Sabrina? We paused our life. Some people break. We went silent, which can be kinder. She moved into a smaller apartment 2 neighborhoods away, and I went to therapy like the man who runs $1 billion company and finally admits he doesn't know how to run his own kitchen. I apologized for all the ways I'd let my father become a line item on a spreadsheet. She apologized for all the ways she had made our love dependent on aesthetics. We didn't throw plates. We didn't court the tabloids. We did the boring work, the honest humiliations. We cried in separate rooms and met in a therapist's office with a box of tissues between us like a relay baton. 2 months later, we told each other the truth we had been circling. We loved the idea of us more than we loved us. We separated, not as a stunt, but as a decision sober enough to stand in daylight. She kept Voices of Tomorrow. I withdrew funding and wished it well. She returned what she could. There was no epic courtroom showdown. Real life is less cinematic and more expensive than movies teach you. During that time, Dad moved into the little carriage house behind my place. A space with sun in the morning and shade in the afternoon and a porch where he could drink coffee and judge my hedges. We spent nights we never had when I was a kid. Pasta on the stovetop, a basketball game muted on TV while he told me stories I'd never asked to hear. He talked about my mother, who left when I was 3, and how he had forgiven her because carrying anger is like holding water in your cupped hands. You think you've got it, then you look down, and you're just wet and empty. He told me about the summer he almost lost the truck and the stranger at the tire shop who spotted him a set of used tires because your boy needs to get to practice. We cried, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, which feels like rain on a roof you didn't know how to fix until you did. I started visiting the hardware store without him because I liked the smell of the aisles and the way the clerks nodded at me like I belonged to something older than my money. I invited his warehouse crew over for a barbecue and paid them triple what the catering company quoted because the food they made tasted like the hands that made it, and I wanted that at my table. The internet moved on, as it always does. Another scandal swallowed ours. I posted one public note. I believe my father was being taken care of. He wasn't. That is my responsibility. We're fixing it, and we're fine. Please respect his privacy. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I learned that sometimes the quiet thing is the strong thing. Spring came. The snow announced its retreat in slow drips. Dad and I built raised garden beds in the backyard. He showed me how to measure twice and cut once, which, ironically, is also excellent advice for authorizing spending. We planted tomatoes and peppers, and he told me when the soil looked thirsty and when it looked hungry. Same as people, he said. Some need water, some need food, some just need you sitting next to them for a while. On Father's Day, I handed him a thin folder. Inside were documents for the Vail Fellowship, a program I'd fund personally. 5 young people from Cedar Flats every year, fully funded to study whatever they wanted as long as they spent one summer working at a place where people punch a clock. They should know both worlds, Dad said, nodding. Eyes bribed be the selection committee, with a panel of his choice. He suggested the pharmacist, the hardware store manager, and a teacher he liked from the high school. We cut a ribbon in the community center. No press. The barber shot a photo on his phone. It was the nicest picture I've ever been in. Sometimes at night, I replay that Christmas party in my head. The hug, the line I tossed like confetti, the way the music stopped, the way Sabrina's smile held and then slipped. The moment my father, who has never made his needs loud, told me in 7 words that the ground was not level under my feet. I think about all the systems I built to keep my life clean. I think about how they failed me in the exact way they were designed to succeed. They kept me insulated from mess, and in doing so, they drafted a mess more elegant and more dangerous. A few weeks ago, I asked Dad if he wanted to move somewhere warmer. He laughed. I'm not done with this winter, he said. He likes seasons because they remind him that nothing good lasts and nothing bad lasts either. Everything cycles. We sat on the porch, and he reached into his pocket and pulled out a little folded sheet of paper. What's that? I asked. Your allowance, he said, trying to keep a straight face. Inside was an $8 bill he'd made from 2 ones stapled to a 5 and a note. For being a good son. I laughed until my ribs hurt. I framed it. It's on my office wall now, next to the charter. When people ask, I tell them it's a company joke. When people who know us ask, I tell them it's a receipt. If you're listening, if you're the person who watched the thumbnail and thought, what kind of son lets his father work 3 jobs? I can tell you how it happens. You start measuring your love in transactions because that's the ruler the world hands you. And someone you love tells you quietly that their life didn't get the deposits you thought you were making. And you have a choice. Defend the story or revise it in front of everyone. Issues révision. It doesn't make me noble. It makes me a son. When I hugged my dad at this year's Christmas party, smaller, warmer, with more regular plates and less shimmer, I didn't say anything about stipends. I asked him whether he liked the cinnamon on the cookies. He said, too much, and ate 3 more. The orchestra was my neighbor's kid on a keyboard. The live painter was my goddaughter with markers at the kids' table. Sabrina sent a card with a handwritten note I keep in a drawer because sometimes kindness is more private than all the rest. And if you need a neat ending, here it is. The music didn't stop. It never does. It changes key. It tries new tempos. It waits while you learn your part. I'm still learning. I'm the boy in the story who forgot to check the cupboard before he bragged about how full it was. I'm also the man who knows now what belongs on the shelves and what doesn't. If you came to my house tomorrow and asked my father whether he's enjoying his $8,000 a month allowance, he'd grin and say, I'm enjoying my son. Then he'd ask if you knew anything about tomatoes, and he'd hand you a shovel, and you'd both go outside and get your hands dirty. That's the brand of this family. In the end, that Christmas party didn't break the music. It tuned my ear. Now, when Dad clears his throat and says, I'm fine, I hear the sharp if there's a wobble under the note. I know when to ask a second time. I know how to read ledgers with my eyes and people with my heart. And I know that no matter how many zeros land in my bank account, the richest I have ever been is the night I sat at my father's tiny kitchen table in Cedar Flats, wrote a charter in simple sentences, and watched his hand stop shaking. That's the story. If you ever find yourself boasting about a gift that never arrived, pause, call the person you love, and ask them what they need. Then go and bring it yourself.